What first brought me to Bethel was a phone call one evening from Tom Johnson, who was one of the executive assistants. He was from the ed department and was helping Dr. Brushaber. Lundquist was still president, but Dr. Brushaber was the dean, taking over some of the faculty hiring. I got a phone call one spring from Bethel, telling me that they were starting a baccalaureate program, and my name had been submitted as someone who might be interested. It was out of the blue, a total surprise. I was leaving the next week for spring break from the college for the beach in North Carolina. So I said, call me back. I'll have to think and pray about this. I don't know what you're talking about. So I had several phone calls with Tom Johnson, and what they wanted was, I found out that had probably come through my old friend Dolores Johnson, who I had taught with. She was now the director, the chair at North Park. She was one of the consultants that Bethel used, along with two other people, to develop their proposal. So what I find out from Tom Johnson is that there is a proposal that's being accepted eventually by the faculty, and they would like to interview me if I'd be at all interested in the program. Because they had checked with other people, like some of their consultants, and nobody was interested. They were all happy where they were. The reason that I got to talk to Dr. Brushaber is that summer of, I think it would be the summer of '80, the BGC, the Baptist General Conference annual meeting, was in Erie, Pennsylvania, which was 50 miles from Jamestown. And that's an easy place. I used to go with friends or with my mom shopping there. So I get this phone call, Dr. Brushaber would like to meet with you. And I said, okay, I've thought about it. I guess I'd like to know more. I'll be glad to drive. They called me back and they said, no, he's going to meet you in Jamestown. He'll meet you at the hotel for lunch. And so I met with Dr. Brushaber at the hotel in downtown Jamestown. Now, Jamestown is about like Wilmer or Rochester or one of the small Minnesota towns. So I met with him, and I remember very specifically, I had read, because of my work at NYU and what I was doing at Michigan, I knew that a lot of new programs were starting in nursing. I also knew that some of the Christian colleges were starting programs, and I had read about some of them, and some of them I was not particularly impressed with the strength of the programs. And so I was, I have to tell you, I was prepared to ask a lot of questions about what about this, what about this, what about this. So I'm meeting with Dr. Brushaber, we're eating lunch, he gives me the proposal, and I read it, and I almost didn't have any questions. I only had a few questions. There was one thing that was an omission that really didn't crop up until after I was hired. And that omission was a place for the clinical lab. But the proposal had the philosophy and the background and the kind of program that belongs in a baccalaureate program. They had it very well spelled out. And they also had a lot of the issues related to faculty and to students and to how it might fit at Bethel. So the next thing to do was to come to Bethel for a meeting. And so I came, this was in the summer. I was appointed for, I came back and forth a couple times for interviews with faculty committees. And it just feel it was God's will for the time. I felt the time was right because where I was personally, I was close to 50. My friends were saying, Eleanor, if you stay at the community college now, you'll stay there forever. If you ever want to move on, you need to move now. I had heard that from several faculty who knew I was in a doctoral program. I had no idea of moving. I'm an only child. I had mom and dad in their 80s. But it seemed like this is where I belong. The people were very welcoming. The committees had worked hard, answered all my questions. And so I was appointed finally for January '81. The problem then was I couldn't move until spring. I had 80-year-old parents to get settled. I had a house to sell. I had to find housing. You know what you do when you have to move a long ways away. So I moved here in '81 in May. And when I came, the week that I drove out here, I got here in time for the last faculty meeting of the year, the last semester. And that was in one of the classrooms. It's like an auditorium. And that was so different from the community college classrooms. But it was very appropriate, very effective. They were discussing educational topics that we need to work on next year. And it was also, have a good summer kind of thing. So I came in the summer to an office up on the third floor right next door to the dean until we got our own offices. So that's how I got here. They hired me as the department chair to open the nursing program. I was hired at, I was all but dissertation at the U of M of Michigan. So I was a professor at the community college. I was not eligible for professor here at that point. But what I was promised by Dr. Brushauber was when I passed my dissertation and had the degree, I would be full professor. So I came as department chair, and I hardly remember, associate professor of nursing. Bethel was a small Christian college where a lot of people knew each other, where I think about the difference in presidents. Dr. Lundquist was the president at the time, although I hardly met him because he was traveling and ready to retire. So Bethel was a pastoral kind of place. And what I found was a lot of people treated it, people that were not academics, people that worked here, treated it like their church. They treated it like their family. They treated it like their backyard or their home. The faculty were very academic, very liberal arts oriented, a very fine faculty. But I have to, but I will say that I was used to that because the community college where I had taught had come out of a 4-year college. And the faculty in that community college were very, very well prepared academics. So it was a small, there was, the illustration I could give you is the Christmas festival and the smorgasbord. They made their own rye bread. They made fresh Swedish rye bread for the festival, for the smorgasbord, and we could buy it. I'm not in any way negating that there was also a very fine educational level. So I had to, my first period here after I moved was hiring faculty, writing curriculum, setting policies. when I said they had left the lab out of the original plan, we got the lab, a lab plan, and what I remember about that is the big controversy over that. I was not really a part of that, but we met with housing and the building supervisors, and the problem was the places that might be the best for the lab were also housing, and that's income. And so I saw the internal workings of Bethel when we have to figure out a hard question. What we ended up getting, however, was a classroom that doesn't exist anymore on the first floor between the, I think it was the dean's office, one of the offices, and financial aid. And the problem with that was we didn't get attacked, but we got reminded that we got the best classroom in the building. Now, it was a very small lab, and at the same time, what I had to do that was brand new for me, I had to buy everything that furnished the lab. So I had to go to Home Depot. And at the same time, what we got was beds and equipment from Midway Hospital that was built, they were constructing, and they had things to give away. So we got free equipment up to some point. So that's where Bethel was very strong academically. It was growing like crazy. And what I remember is thinking, they're assimilating a whole bunch of new people every year. The fall that the first fall I was here, there was an orientation meeting, and I was part of 27 people that were all new faculty. And I think that, I'm not sure of this, I don't remember the numbers, but there had been a similar number the year before, and there was a similar number the year after. And then enrollment began to drop. And there was one very difficult period when enrollment dropped, and a lot of things changed. So that's kind of where I began. Can I tell you about one of the pieces of opposition? Opposition to the program, to begin with, there was a proposal, I think it was 2 years before, and it was turned down by the faculty. Part of it was the complexity of nursing and the size. And this is what I picked up in faculty conversations. By the time they came to me, the faculty understood that there was going to be a nursing program, so they might as well accept it. Okay, one of the things, this is not, and what I'm telling you, this is not official opposition. There was opposition to the size of the program, the number of students, and the number of faculty. There was an opposition to the fact that it was a completely different kind of program, and is nursing really a liberal arts program, or is that just a practice program? And one of the things that I got when I came and got into my office the first time, Tom Johnson came with a stack of folders this high. And those folders were student advisees who were already here and wanted to stay for nursing. So he'd been their advisor. Here, you can have these. The rest of them were folders that related to the development of the program and the development of the policies. Okay, so I read what the consultant said. I read what national organizations said. I read how they put the program together. But there was a folder in there that they were afraid I would get all upset about. And it was a folder with a 10-page diatribe by Don Larson called, now I have to get the name straight, Is Florence Nightingale a white elephant, or does Bethel need a nursing program? And the whole paper was a story about Florence Nightingale and the place that she carried, the activity that she was involved in, the fact that these were all women, and the fact that that Don was very concerned that the size of the program would completely overwhelm small programs like anthropology and linguistics and other small programs. And so the program, he wrote about all the kinds of things that would have to come in because of a nursing program. And the final paragraph was what got to, and when I say got to me, I come from a family with a father who told jokes for everything, so I know humor. His final statement was one of the things he was scared of was that if they got a nursing program at Bethel, at graduation, the procession of gowned academics would be preceded by the nursing chorus in white dresses with stethoscopes around their neck. Okay, what I found out is Dwight Jessup, who was the dean, was scared to death that I was going to get all upset, and I was laughing. The paper was absolutely marvelous, and his point was very difficult. So that's one of the things that came about, but that was not official, and it was not part of what affected our development. One of the things that I thought about a lot in terms of what I've written and what I've thought about, nursing at that point was known to be primarily women, so that was accepted. Okay, I have to say that the other thing that promoted nursing is that there was a history that a lot of faculty didn't know about that goes back to the 1950s. There was a doctor that was saying to Bethel, you need to start a nursing program. There was the Mounds Midway School of Nursing that was a diploma program that was saying, we're going out of business because we're too expensive and the hospital can't promote this. I met at a party, at a reception, I met a woman who had been the head of Mounds Midway School of Nursing. And when she came to me, she said, are you Eleanor Edman? And I said, yes. She said, are you that person that they've just hired at Bethel? And I said, yes. And she said, hallelujah. She said, I've been telling them for years they need to do a nursing program at Bethel. So that was outside. I also had some really beautiful experiences with people from the BGC and Bethel and Baptist churches that had coffee hours to invite me to. We also had a promoter in Shar Olson, who was the director of the Browns Midway School of Nursing that was closing. And in spite of the fact that it was closing, she was a promoter of baccalaureate education. And so one of the things she did was to take me all over the city and introduce me to the hospitals that we would use for clinical. So we had that outside. What happened internally is we were accepted. And one of the things that I have to say, because I know that this does not exist anymore, one of the places here and one of the activities that was part, and not official, unofficial, totally unofficial, the faculty lounge where we had lunch. And I am a strong promoter of nurses being part of the whole school, not being off with our stethoscopes and our drugs and our medicines and all of our blood pressure cuffs. And so our nursing faculty sat in the faculty lounge with everybody else, and we talked about whatever was on the topic for the day. And we were accepted that way. Another way, when I told you what Don Larson wrote, I had a very interesting experience with him because I didn't know him very well. He was sharp man, very interesting to talk to. I got a letter. I was on a mailing list from a classmate of mine from Chicago who had come to Bethel to get a degree in linguistics. She was a nurse who was going into translation. And so she said to me in a letter, say hello to Don Larson. So after Christmas, I said something to him one day. This was probably 2 years into my tenure here. I said, Don, I've just had a letter from Jean Soderman saying hello to you. And he looked at me and he said, who's that? No. How do you know her? Well, I said, she's my classmate from West Sub. Oh, well, she had come back here and gotten first a baccalaureate degree in linguistics, and then she got a master's degree. So she made the way in one way or another for me to be okay with Don. So I got to know him as a person, not just as a nurse. There were many opportunities like that, and the one that is probably the also humorous is a couple of the science departments kept asking me when we would get a male in our department. And I said, we will, and we did. But I asked them, when will you get a woman? Because biology and chemistry did not have any women. So I could say back to them, we both have to work on that. You know what? I'm not sure I can tell you anything other than that they were accepted like everybody else. They took phys ed, they took elective courses, they took courses. There were one of the things that there were nursing courses that were only nursing students, okay, for the major. The liberal arts courses, they were with everybody else. And so they did the same things that everybody else did. They played in a phys ed, they sang in the choir, they participated in activities on campus. They were not different from anybody else. Because one of the things that was also helpful in terms of this liberal arts practice split that was evident at once in a while was one of the things that we did in the curriculum. We built in a gen ed course in ethics, and that comes out of the accreditation requirements. If we had a course like ethics or something that came from a different department, it could not be just for nurses. It couldn't be ethics for nurses. It had to be ethics, general ethics. So our students got in Stan Anderson's ethics courses. And one of the things that I heard from Stan a number of times was, Eleanor, your students lend something that is different than some of our other students who are wonderful students, but your students meet ethical problems every day in the clinical. And so they can talk from a realistic standpoint about a family that's got an ethical problem. Now, it's not that the other students don't, but he accepted nursing as a gen ed kind of course. I actually, when you ask that, I don't know what to say to you, because our students were accepted just like everybody else. I would say it was, I don't see any difference. I've been accepted where I've worked. I've had good experiences at the university. I've had good experience at NYU. In my diploma program, I was able to start some new things that they developed. I've been accepted for who I am. I thought about the women that were, in fact, I made a list of some of the women that I knew here. I think about, let's see, I worked with the dean's office. I work with Marilyn Starr. I got to know her personally just as a friend. I have to say, if I'm really honest, I see the women at Bethel helped me learn Bethel. I did not see them mentor me in terms of the program or nursing or education. I had as good or better a background than many of them. And I basically, what I did have to do as we developed the program was explain over and over and over again what clinical is and why it's different than a class with 45 students, and why we have a different ratio of faculty and students. We cannot take 45 people to Hennepin County. You can take a group of 8 or 10 to a clinical area. So what I had to do a lot, and I don't want to say this in terms of me. Beth Peterson and Sandy Peterson and Nancy Olin and the faculty were the absolute best educators of what nursing education was all about. So I spurred that and supported that, but I'm not the only one that spoke to that issue. When I said what I did about Dr. Lundquist, I thought about the presidents and the deans. I'll tell you one of the things that Dr. Lundquist did, that because I didn't see him very much. He was away. He was on a missionary trip a lot of the time. But one of the things that he did that was a very heartfelt welcome for me, one of the times that I came before I moved here was Christmas weekend when the festival was on. And that was so exciting for me because that year, half of the festival was a Swedish festival. And so the choirs wore outfits. And I happened to be a collector of Swedish folk dress. So it was a beautiful weekend. But it was in the gym. And I know how hard it was for the faculty to deal with the acoustic issues, but that's another problem. But at the smorgasbord, I was with the people that took me around was Tom Johnson and his wife and Dwayne Lind and his wife. So I'm with them. Dr. Lundquist comes and gets me and says, I want to introduce you to a lot of the faculty. So he brings me around in the dining room to the different tables and introduces me as this new person that's going to do nursing. And he introduces me as, this is Eleanor Edman. She is a gift from the covenant. So, see, that also speaks to the issue of Bethel as a church-related place. What I see as some of the differences is the diversity in the faculty and the fact that a lot of faculty come from very different areas in the church world. I happened to hire one person that had not been hired before. She was part-time, and probably that's why she got hired. But I hired a faculty member in mental health that was Catholic. And there had been very few Catholic faculty. The other person I hired as a public health nurse, and she was full-time, was Black. And she was I think one of the very first Black people at Bethel. The issue for her was we couldn't keep her very long. She was here several years and was absolutely marvelous. She met someone at a conference, a church conference, and got married and moved away. So we lost her. But we had a very diverse faculty. Eventually they had, I think it was after I retired, they had an Asian faculty member that moved to the West Coast. So the thing is, Bethel became much more international. One of the things that we were able to help with that I was so pleased with is God sent us faculty who had international connections. So right from the beginning, our interim course was one which could be a travel course. And so we had students that went to Israel. We had students in Israel when there was a shooting, a very serious event. We had students in Africa. We've had students in the Middle East. We've had students all over the world with faculty who had not only been there, but had worked there. So they had both, they had visitor knowledge, but they also had internal knowledge. And that is one of the strongest things that we did. Now, the other piece of that is the first couple of years until we developed the overseas events, is interim was called Cultural Diversity in Nursing, because one of the things that we were very heavy on is helping students understand cultural diversity and healthcare. And so one of the things that we did for those students during interim, if they couldn't go overseas, we found clinical areas where they could spend January, where they were the only ones speaking English. And so we had students that were in clinics over on the east side, where everyone was Asian. We had students in clinics in South Minneapolis where everybody was Hispanic. We had students we had one group of students in public health that worked with a public health nurse that helped put on a winter clothes giveaway for Hmong children. So that was a very strong part of our international, and that fit with what Bethel was doing. So it was not, it was expansive, but it wasn't new. See, one of the things that is part of my background, my mom and dad were from Swedish immigrant families. Okay, they were immigrants. But we lived in New York City, in Flushing, which is Queens. My classroom in all of my grade school, first kindergarten up to 6th grade, the children in my grade school classroom were practically all from overseas. They came, this was just before and during World War II. And so I had students that I lived with every day who were just learning English because they were from an Italian family. I also, in the church that we went to, the Baptist church we went to, were very good about working with refugees. And one of the families that I remember as a Sunday school student was a family that filled a whole pew in the front of the church. It was a mom and dad with 10 children, and they had walked out of Russia to get away from opposition to their Baptist background and the war. And so at that time, what we were, I remember my Sunday school class and the other children in Sunday school were asked to bring, every Sunday we were asked to bring either good used clothing for children or canned goods that they could use, because they were helping dad find a job. But here was this whole row of kids of a family that I still remember how awed we were with these people who had walked to get away. So I had a background, and the other piece that I guess I can say that doesn't have anything to do with nursing, it doesn't have anything to do with Bethel, but I have a dad who was from a Swedish background where, you know, mashed potatoes and meatballs and gravy is Sunday dinner. My dad lived in New York as a 26-year-old, and one of the things that he loved was to go to different ethnic restaurants to eat. And so he would, if I say about him, if he had enough money, he would have eaten his way around the world. So I learned to eat with chopsticks when I was 5 years old. Okay, I'm going to take that to Bethel. My concern in what I was doing, not only in nursing, but in my work in education, was the cultural diversity that was happening in the U.S. and that our nursing students have to understand the different people that they're working with. For instance, one of the things that I had seen before I got into upper level nursing, when I was in the diploma program, I have a memory of an event at the hospital where the students came to me and said, "Eleanor, you've got to come and listen to what's happening." So they take me down the hall. A man had had surgery who was, my Jamestown is not far from a Native American reservation. He was a Native American and had been in an accident, and his leg was amputated. The reason there was an upheaval was the family was upset because what they found is that the operating room was going to throw the leg out with everything else. The leg had to be memorialized and have a funeral because it was part of that man's body. So I was introduced very early on to ethnic diversity, and we were lucky here with what we could do because there was such wonderful experiences for our students. What it did was give us a different perspective on what guys think and what guys don't think in terms of just the world. I'll give you an illustration. One of the this turned out to be what I'm going to call a mini controversy. One of the things that happened probably in our second, or it might have been second year or third year of actual programming, I got a notice from the Gideons that they wanted to come and give New Testaments to our nursing students, which is one of the things the Gideons did. Now, the Gideons as an organization is just about over, but this is when they were very active. And I know that because my dad was a Gideon and my mother was the auxiliary president. So I've lived with the Gideons and Gideon Bibles. So I brought that to students, that the Gideons wanted to give out Bibles. Now, I'll back up because one of the things that we did that caused some of the controversy that developed, and this was only with one person, was we had a student council that decided a lot of the things that happened that were cultural or recreational, or, are we going to play games on Friday night, or are we going to go out? What are we going to do? And so I brought this to the students. And when speaking of the men, one of the president, the resident chairman of the student group was a male. And he came to me and said, "I've talked to the students and they're saying what the Gideons wanted to do was come to a class and take like the first 15 minutes to tell about the Gideons and give out the testimony. We don't mind them coming, but we all have Bibles. We don't want to lose class time for that." Okay, so I talked to the Gideon women, and what they decided they'd do was they would stand outside the classroom with a table and with information, and anybody that wanted one could have a testimony. The problem with that was it got picked up by one of the people whose name I'm not going to mention. It's a family that's very well known, that made a huge hullabaloo over us Bethel Nursing isn't going to give out Bibles. And part of it was not the issue of Bibles. Part of it was that this person was also a graduate of Mounds Midway School of Nursing, and she wasn't sure that we knew how to teach nursing. That was the other issue. And so I got a phone call from, and see, here's where I don't remember names. I got a phone call. I think his name was Jim. He was a vice president. He was in charge of admissions and um, and advertising, that whole area, and financial aid. Said, Eleanor, we have to talk. Somebody is here. Somebody's coming. So we set up an appointment. And what I was able to do is to say, I don't make all the decisions for our students. Our students make some of them. Well, but aren't you like their mother? No, I'm not their mother. I am their teacher. And one of the things we're trying to do is to make them as independent as possible. And so we survived that. It actually went away after a while, but it was an interesting observation. So, yes, there was some interesting conflict, but it didn't, it didn't go anywhere. And you see, I was so proud of the students. They were kind, they were respectful, they made their point known, and they got their testaments. So this was not a big issue, but it was a student issue that we were able to resolve in a very interesting way. In our first year, a lot of the students, probably first and second year, a lot of our students had friends or relatives that were in other schools of nursing. And one of the things that was true in diploma schools, the old 3-year schools, is you went for 6 months as a probationer, a probie. And during that time, they could either keep you or sack you if you didn't do well. You were not accepted as a full-time student until the end of that period of time. And at that time, most schools had something that they called pinning, which was a special program saying you're now a nursing student. So some of our students wanted to have a program in the spring of their first year, which was a special program just saying we're part of nursing at Bethel. The faculty and I got together and we said, wait a minute, there's a little bit of an issue here. The families are going to come for graduation next year. The families may come for homecoming. How many times are families going to want to come? So we talked to the students about some of the issues regarding travel. And we said, can you think of something else that you would do that they would like? And what I learned from this is I learned how important tradition is. It was their tradition or their friend's tradition which they wanted. This is what happened, and we were so pleased. The spring of the first year, the students did not have any clinical to begin with. It was all classroom work and lab here on campus. The students got together and said, we want something to say that we are real nursing students. And what they did was to have supper at the cafeteria in the seminary. They had a spaghetti supper on the night that they got their name pins for their uniforms, because they would be going on to clinical. And so they got name pins and a Bethel pin. So they had a special evening, and what they did was, I didn't know how they were going to handle it. I didn't know what they were going to do, but they had this program. And I finally said to the committee, I said, okay, are you going to have a speaker? Because they hadn't talked to any of us. Oh yeah, we've asked Char Olson. Char Olson was the retiring director of the Mounds Midway School of Nursing. And so they had a dinner over at the seminary with Char Olson welcoming them to Bethel and saying, we are moving out of an older form of nursing education. And so we were so proud of what they did to handle that controversy. There's one other area of attitude. It doesn't have anything to do with men and women in nursing. One of the things that we had to do the very first year, of course, was to write for Bethel. We had to do the catalog, and we had to do magazine articles. I didn't do the writing. There was a writing team for that. One of the most important things was a picture to put on the brochure with the curriculum that would be used for advertising. So I get a phone call one day. Can you come down to the office? And this was, I think, Florence Johnson's bailiwick. She's one of the publicity people. Very helpful, very supportive. They said, we've got something to show you. We've been putting together a mock-up of a brochure for Bethel, while in the department, what we were doing was putting together the curriculum and the statements about the program. So I go down to the office, and they pull out this brochure, really pretty, 4-color brochure, and on the cover, get this, on the cover is a litter of the kind of litter that you are put on from the by the ambulance, okay, an emergency room litter. Here on the litter is this beautifully outfitted football player, and standing next to him is one of our students dressed in a white uniform with a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff, going to take this football player's blood pressure. I almost went ballistic. I said, we are not hooking up our students with football players. We cannot do this. And so what it did was kind of give an illustration of the culture, of a culture about students, and our opportunity to say, no, this is not going to go. And so what we ended up with was a mom and 2 kids, a toddler and maybe a 5-year-old, and a nurse reading something to them in instructions with a nurse. So we don't put down football players, but we don't advertise them. One of the things, one of the questions that you asked her is not Bethel, but you said outside. And one of the things I guess I will mention, because it was very difficult, there are 2 areas that I can think of where men and women have could disagree. I was on a committee. I was very active with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and Nurses Christian Fellowship with a group of other nurses. And there was one, and I was on the board for a number of years in the mid-'80s. One of the most painful and troublesome periods was when there was some upheaval in the administration, and another woman who was the chief nurse of Philadelphia Children's, known worldwide for her work, known by C. Everett Koop, the Surgeon General, she and I were asked to not put in our request to be on the board the next year. And the reason wasn't because we were women. The reason supposedly was because there were some people that felt that some more popular women should be appointed. Well, that fell apart. But we were no longer on the board. And I was not well known at that point, but my colleague, Erna, was a person that was known around all of InterVarsity and NCF as someone who was not only international but local. What I've also learned is the people that asked that question were no longer on the board a couple years later. So that changed. The only other place, I said the two places that I can think of where my position as a woman was a problem, and this did not affect me personally, but I was on the leadership team at First Covenant Minneapolis until I left when I retired and went to another covenant church. And the pastor that we had for a period during a very troubled time did not believe in women in leadership positions. And so it was very clear that he did not approve. However, the church approved, and so there was nothing happened. But it was a very troubling time. And so what I say is, when you first told me about this project, is I don't see any issue. I did not see any serious issues at Bethel other than fun stuff. I mean, we joked about, does chemistry have a woman? Does Bethel have a man on their faculty? I didn't see any way, and now I don't know what other faculty will say. For instance, what I don't know, when I met with George Rushhaber, I had to bargain hard on salary. And the reason I had to bargain hard was the salary offered was adequate. What I realized, however, for Bethel is that my benefit package at my community college was much better. And so I was better off in the long run at that rate. And I don't remember the details, but they did make some adjustments in terms of my salary. What I don't know, and I don't know anything about the other faculty women that were hired, salaries were secret. And so I had absolutely no way of comparing. Was there a difference in at the level that I was hired from, let's say, some of the men? I have no idea about that. But that this was not, as I can remember, this was not something that we would sit in the faculty lounge or in our department and argue about. Does Bethel like women? That was not an issue. And the issue did not relate to students at all. I had some wonderful experiences with students and their parents. I also had some very hard times when I had to say your son or your daughter is not going to continue. But that's normal college. This was not unusual. My hopes for Bethel is that it continues to be a strong, academically solid school with Christian values. My hopes also are that Bethel survives right now because of what's happening out there socially in terms of the conflicts that are in the church. I read a lot. I know a lot about what's going on. I see the social issues that are problems like the LGBT issue. I see issues regarding men and women in what looks to me in a country right now that some people in some areas of the political world don't know what to do between men and women. So my hopes for Bethel is that it maintains its. You wrote a beautiful piece on the irenic spirit. And my hope for Bethel is that there will be a kind of awareness of the big changes, because I think there are changes Bethel is going to have to make in terms of acceptance and a willingness to deal with that the Christian public is not ready to accept. So my hope is that Bethel will be able to survive strong academic, strong spiritual, strong culturally diverse student activities, student learning, and student futures.